I had a positive experience interacting with a group of neurotypical humans last week. I know, I can't believe it either. And it wasn't even planned. And I have to admit, it gives me a little hope. I can't wait to tell you about it. Hello friends, welcome to Mr. Snayl's Wild Ride. I am Mr. Snayl and the wild ride is my life so far. As many of you know, I live practically in the middle of nowhere, and as a result, I'm pretty isolated and have had a hard time making friends even though I've been here for several years now. As someone on the autism spectrum, making new friends is not really one of my special skills as it is. Now my wife, who's an extrovert, has also been struggling to make friends in the area. Just because she's not on the autism spectrum doesn't mean it's easy for her. It's easier for her than it is for me, but it doesn't mean that it's fun. She's able to take advantages of social opportunities and gatherings, but it's still difficult when you're older to make new friends. A couple of nights ago, one of my wife's new friends was having a small gathering at her house. Let's call this friend Dolly. I think it's fairly safe to say that Dolly is also an extrovert, at least compared to me. She's fairly new to the area as well, so similar to my wife, she's been having trouble finding people with similar interests, cultural stimulation, stuff to do in the area, things along those lines. So Dolly's having this small porch party, as she calls them, which she has every couple of months or so, weather permitting, and the weather was definitely permitting this day when my wife asked if I wanted to go, and so I said, okay. Now, my wife has asked before, when there have been gatherings and things like that. She always asks. But what made this time different was actually a number of factors. So it was still daylight out. For whatever reason, I wasn't exhausted. It was going to be a small group. That was promising. My wife was being very flexible about how long we stayed or when we could leave, even if it was only for 20 minutes. And last but most, I was finally going to get to meet Dolly's girlfriend. Now, before you get any big ideas, let me just clarify. Meeting Dolly's girlfriend, let's call her Kelsey, was exciting because I'd heard about her for weeks and months before this, but I'd never actually met her myself. My wife had gone to dinner with the two of them or gone over to their house or whatever lots of times, and I'd heard all these stories about her. I definitely felt a sort of kinship with her. Kelsey is also an introvert, and I don't think I'm talking out of turn to say that she's also had some health issues that's really impacted her lifestyle as well. So I felt like Kelsey, with respect to her relationship with Dolly, was much as I am with respect to my relationship with my wife. We were analogs in that regard. I was up for going. En route, as is often the case, my wife and I had sort of a powwow about who was going to be there. My wife described each of the people, and she insisted that I Google this one sculptor that was going to be there so I could see what his artwork was like. And it actually gave me a little quippy comment that I could make about his search engine optimization skills and things like that. So that sort of was like one feeble arrow in the quiver. When we arrive, I steel my nerves and we walk up and everyone says, hello, hey, but they're chill. It's a small crowd. There's like 5 people there and they're all a bit younger than me, which is good actually, because in general, I don't feel my age at all. And so I tend to be more comfortable around people that are 10 or 15 years younger than I am, which doesn't speak well of me, but it is what it is. Actually, there were a couple people there that I had met once before. Familiar is good, sets me at ease a little bit. Dolly came up and greeted me and gave me a hug. I'm into hugging. I know that's not a very Aspie thing to be into physical affection, but my mom was a huge, huge hugger, and so my primary love language is all about physical affection. So that's how I was conditioned. But then Kelsey came up and gave me a hug. I was already sort of inclined toward doing that anyway, even though I hadn't met her before. So the fact that she was also inclined that way, that sort of cemented things with respect to my preconceived notion about our parallel existence or whatever you want to call it. So kind of weird, but a couple of the guys that were there looked familiar. One fellow reminded me of Lance Armstrong, the cyclist, and the other fellow looked like a younger, more handsome version of comedian Paul F. Tompkins, who I really like. For good or ill, the fact that they looked familiar in that way was oddly comforting. So that was a good thing in its way. One couple there had a young baby present, and normally that would be a cause for alarm and apprehension with regard to sensory overload. The baby was quiet and basically slept the whole time. So that was like a bullet dodged. So that was good too. So everything sort of started off really well on several of the right feet, fortunately. Can't forget that Dolly and Kelsey also have a dog. I like dog people. I got to meet him, which was nice, and he's very well behaved. It's solid obedience. And he's a pit bull. I have to admit, I have a soft spot for pit bulls. I like their big blocky heads. And also, of course, if you'll pardon the expression, they're kind of an underdog. They get a bad rap and all the legislation that gets passed against them in various cities and states and blah, 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 blah. So that was cool as well. And I managed to avoid saying something even slightly inappropriate to anybody. And I verified that with my wife. She would not hesitate to tell me if I said something even the tiniest bit inappropriate. I don't know how I managed to avoid that, but I'm not complaining. And we managed to leave before I got tired instead of while I was burning out and turning weird. So in case you can't tell, I feel very positive about this whole experience. And not just because it wasn't bad, or because the people were nice and friendly and warm. Those things are all true. But because I also managed to skip what I've come to think of as sort of the zero-step assessment visit. One viewer had mentioned, maybe even more than one viewer had mentioned, there can be this step where you go to a new gathering or a new group activity or something like that, and you just sort of plan on going and basically scoping the place out, seeing what the people are like, seeing how the whole thing goes down without really intending to participate, just to get over the newness of all of the things there, the smells and the sound, the people and their behavior, the social dynamic and all of that. Because some of what was happening was familiar, and some of the people were familiar, I managed to skip that step 0 and kind of even part of step 1, and now I'm sort of primed to a number of different options depending on what happens next. You know, getting together with part of the group, or some of them and some different new people, or, you know, it'll depend on what presents itself next. But, so what have we learned? Well, it pays to take a chance once in a while. Now, not wild, rash chances, but I'm talking about informed, prepared type chances. I'm usually too overwhelmed to even try that kind. It helps to have a pal to go with you, of course. It helps that it wasn't some kind of all-night bash or a dinner party. There was no pressure to eat the food or drink the drink. In fact, it was a bring-your-own-booze kind of gathering. So the fact that I didn't bring any booze meant that I was under no obligation to drink any booze. I'm not a teetotaler by any means, but I'm on a number of medications that are all, do not drink alcohol with this medication. As I've been saying for years, I spend too much time struggling to stay awake to willfully fall asleep. So the next time there's some kind of gathering with some of these same people, I know a little bit of what to expect, at least sort of their vibe. And that counts for something. It'll be interesting to see how this sort of continues to unfold. Hopefully it'll be gradual, but I'm optimistic, and I don't use that word very lightly. You know, it's not the whole war, but it's a small victory, and I'll take it. Thanks for tuning in. Definitely like this video and subscribe for new episodes every week. And wear your sunscreen. My wife, who's an extrovert, has also been struggling in this area. Not as much as I'm struggling trying to do this. Someone who's not on the spectrum and is also no longer hampered by her, what is she not hampered by again? Think, Fippo, think. And it was a special plus. I have a soft spot for pit bulls. I like their big blocky heads. The reason that meeting killers, she would not hesitate she would not hesitate to tell me if I said even the tiniest